Bonjour à tous. Merci à l'ITEPMAE de m'avoir
Thank you to the ITEPMAE, for especially Denis, for asking me to introduce this afternoon with this overall topic, from alert to regulation, which steps. I will try to keep it well summed up. My presentation is going to be a bit heavy. I'll try not to put you to sleep. An overview first. We can sum up this topic by a lot of dichotomic, binary oppositions, because here we have a lot of operators, producers, people from the sector. You are producers, you may be consumers, and in between you have agencies in charge of protection. What do they protect you from? Risk, is it the same as a danger? Risk, for instance, is trees along the road is danger. So risk is danger plus exposure. It will be useful in the following, you will see. If there's a risk, you need to assess it, characterize it. Where is the issue? Where is the problem? First examination of the publications, the literature, where can we find contaminants and molecules that are contaminants? And then maybe another agency will decide how to manage the risk. Do you forbid the plant? Do you put warnings on the labels? For pharmaceuticals, for instance, assessment and management are in the same agency. For food, it's a separate agency. There are pros and cons to that. So my notion is to start from the alert and to go to the regulation, but I'm going to broaden contaminants to food supplements and plants that may be risky, not because of contaminants, but of molecules that are naturally present and that could lead to certain activities. If you're looking for a pesticide, or if you look at what quantity a normal molecule is present in the plant, it's not the same approach, the same tools, the same objectives, the same probability of findings. So it depends on what you're looking for and of the context. I told you about the pharmaceutical sector versus food sector. These two sectors are very different. But for pharmaceuticals, we admit a risk. There's always a cost-benefit or benefits-risk assessment, whereas food, we want it to be safe, full stop. So these are two different worlds. And when they regulate, they're only regulating on what they're in charge of. So you can have a regulation on one plant, which differs whether it's pharmaceutical or it's food. And then there are several levels of regulations, as you all know. And intrinsically, you need to differentiate EU member states and the EU, because member states have different philosophies from the EU. Member states want to protect their population, reduce risks and so on. The EU, on the other hand, its foundation is to promote peace through a common market, if you will. So, de facto, there is a text that promotes common market before safety, even if there are food safety agencies at the EU level. So, between an alert and regulatory implementation, it seems easy. Toxical effects observed by some doctors or chemists or nutritionists or an agency. There's an alert raised. The risk is characterized, quantified, assessed. Then they decide how to protect the population, and if needs be, they pass legislation or regulation. However, in real life, it's more complicated. Let's take the example of the pyrolysidine alkaloids. PAs. We've known for a long time that they are toxic. The Germans started wondering for a long time if we should assess the exposure to the this. So what I put on the left is pharmaceutical, on the right it's food. So the German thought some medicinal plants need to be looked after. We shouldn't have more than 1 microgram per day along one's life. So they keep studying. In 2007, the Food Agency, which has been quite recent, does everything the EU asks of it, and, among others, assessing the risk as feed in fodder and stuff of the PAs. Yes, there is a risk. We don't have enough data. We need to work properly. We need good practices or best practices in the agricultural sector. The German side of food realized that senescent ragwort is used in some salads, and so they carry out listing of plants that you can use in the food sector. In 2011, children that consume a lot of honey may be exposed. In the meantime, the pharmaceutical side, the European Agency for Medicinal Products, starts wondering about PAs. The Germans keep working on it too, on the food aspect. So they realize that the risk is pretty low, that you just need to reduce as much as possible the exposure. It keeps on, it goes on. So the cutoff goes down. In France, borage appears as a target. Labeling becomes an issue. Maximum level is imposed. In Germany, in terms of medicine, the value is set up higher up. The EFSA, EFSA, I'm sorry, I have to sum it up, but it keeps working on an assessment, and it ends up with a regulation of maximum dose for tea, herbal teas, everything that's food-related. The value depends on the plant. And the European Pharmacopoeia proposes a way of dosing these PAs. So there is a parallel evolution. Probably the same set of data are used. If operators, if I get it right, operators are sorry to see that it's not really realistic, because one plant in a whole hectare can put a red tag on the whole farm. So there are issues with this approach. Second example, I'm going to broaden my focal to use examples of plants. What is pharmacologically active could be toxic, like hard rot. So the hydroxyanthracenic heterozytes, double H. So chemists will tell you that you need not to take too much of it. In 2012, a food operator asks the EU to say that a food supplement improves and regulates transit in the long term. They want to have this allegation authorized for their product, knowing that there is buckthorn in their product. And it feels right because this allegation has been empirically known for a long time. Yes, the EFSA says there's a lactobacillus or bacillus or something that refuses. Vivatech changes its allegation the following year. The EFSA examines it. Yes, it's a well-known effect, but it's a well-known effect for many plants because of many molecules. So we won't allow this this allegation for your product, but for all plants, which is a weird way to proceed because it doesn't do that. And then Vivatech is upset because, well, it was our idea, applying it to all other products. It's not great. So some people, and one of them is here today, are protesting because there's a toxicity related to this efficacy in these plants, and the EFSA answers, no, we're not going to change our opinion. We were right to make the decision we made. On the food side, Germany said that aloes is also carcinogenic, so of course it frightened everyone. Further to that, the EFSA, with a specific panel, with a specific group of experts, confirmed this carcinogenicity, which led to an additional line in a regulation article, which is 1925-2006, Article 8. So all these molecules were forbidden and put under community control. So something weird happened. First conclusion from this story, an allegation request led to the creation of a regulation on safety. So it was not a domino effect, but a butterfly effect. What is this article? It's in a regulation on the adding of vitamins and minerals in some food. This sentence in particular, the point is to guarantee the way the internal markets work while promoting a high level of protection for consumers. This is very important in the regulation. And Article 8 says that the Commission can, either because it's been asked to by a member state or on its own, can consider that a specific substance or a plant, in our case, can have a specific status, 3 specificity, either complete ban, ephedra yohimbe, aloes and hydroxyanthracenicks. Sorry. So, or there are conditions, trans fatty acid maximum 2%, for instance. For green tea, there's going to be one coming. And thirdly, community control. It's an in-between situation when we don't have enough elements to say that it's toxic or non-toxic. So it's a kind of limbo, if you will, purgatory, where the product can be examined. So anyone can bring in information proving that it's not toxic, and after the 4 years of limbo, then we decide what further. For monoclonals, for burdock, Sona, and so on. So we've described the history of this shift from alert to regulation. Now let's look at how it happens. Let's see what happens in France. The DGCCRF, which is the administration in charge of risks, they write a note from the French authorities. They send it to the European Commission through the Secretariat to European Affairs. So the Commission, this authority needs the Commission. So if the EFSA scientific opinion, it will lead to a regulation voted by the European Parliament. It's not the case for every notification from the member state authorities. For instance, the DGCCRF in France asked the EFSA to look at melatonin and berberine. In both cases, the ANSES, so the French agency with a plant group in its midst, They come with scientific opinions. In those cases, the ANSES actually decided to look into these ingredients. It was an inside decision. So yes, there is a risk in the target population. So for these two cases, the Commission didn't answer the same way. For melatonin, they say, no, each member state needs to sort coexistence with pharmaceuticals containing the same molecules. However, for berberine, they started the procedure, and so the EFSA is going to work on berberine. So a detail that can explain many things. The expert group, given the field of specialties on Article 8, well, has just been changed recently. So the heterosides was examined by a certain panel, and now it's shifting to diet, energy, and food panels, so it shouldn't change the way it's worked on. But since the panel has changed, so it's a group of new people, the alpha-lipoic acid was examined, and the conclusion said we can't come up with a threshold value, so the Commission doesn't know what to do from these reports. It can happen. So works are going to start on several plants like fennel and so on. So if you look at the number of plants and ingredients used in Europe, it doesn't amount to many. But over the past few years, it's accelerating. So maybe, agencies are getting used to triggering this process more and more often. Why was it not used more often before? Maybe it's because the market needed time to, be created before being hindered. For other member states, there's, more leeway. In France, the DGCCRF must prevent legal risks. They don't want to be sued because of the risks. So what they do is give guidelines, that is, administrative decisions that they publish on their website, that is used by various operators, and that informs on certain limits for vitamins and so on. It's not really official, but it does work. So far, the DGCCRF is happy the way it works. Now, let me tell you, where do these alerts come from? Why did the ANSES started thinking of melatonin, berberine, and so on? Another example, plants that are supposed to have a slimming effect. Some have been forbidden for a long time, both for food supplements and for pharmaceuticals. In 2009, the US actually bans Garcinia and Hoodia. Later, the pharmaceutical agency that does both risk and management decided to ban prescriptions of these three plants, Garcinia, Hoodia, and Citrus aurantium, from all GPs. So there's no need for justification. Dieting is dangerous. Those plants have risks, so let's ban their dieting use. That was pharmaceutical. On the other hand, on the food market, you can still purchase those. Canada expresses a limit dose for Citrus aurantium and its synephrine. So Germany finds another threshold with another scientific opinion. In 2012, same year, the French pharmaceutical agency. So they get the results from an investigation and they forbid these molecules at the pharmaceutical level. But for the food supplements aspect, they come up with a threshold, a ceiling, 20 milligrams per day. And 2 years ago, there was an acute hepatitis that was lethal with a food supplement that contained one of these forbidden plants, the Garcinia. So to conclude this anecdote, there is a discrepancy between pharmaceutical and food sectors, and maybe the burden of proof maybe should actually be switched. And maybe there's also influence from other countries. Canada came up with an opinion, and that triggered other things.
So here you have pharmacovigilance, which allowed them to detect many cases. But there are 3 vigilance systems, maybe even 4, concerning all of these products, which include plants and use, to include pharma and food within. We don't have much time to talk about it, but you have to understand, say, that pharmacovigilance and Nutrivigilance don't work in the same way when it comes to determining to appetite. Is it the medicament? Is it the medicine that's responsible for the undesirable effect or not? They don't work in the same way. I'm afraid I can't get into the details. There is no European Nutrivigilance. The member states do it. And the latest news is that the European Commission doesn't want to get involved in something linked to Nutrivigilance. They leave that to the member states. At the same time, there are already 2 systems in place, monitoring systems, early warning systems. You have the RASFA system. It's the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed. You can see this has been going on for some quite time. And you can see all the cases. You've got dioxin in the chicken, mad cow. The problems that they had in Austria with the sheep, contaminated milk in China. These are all food crises that have happened around the world. And the last one was a problem we had with eggs. So, of course, this gives rise to a wave of actions which are put in place with risk management. These are a network of risk managers. They say, what are we going to do? What are we going to withdraw from the market? And besides them, there's another network, a network of people who are assessors, who exchange amongst themselves on what's happening in order to decide whether or not... Oh, hold on, I'm sorry, I'm still on RASF. Here's some quantitative figures for you. You can see warnings. And you can see it's not rare, actually, to have some kind of warning. However, they very rarely give rise to an absolute implementation of regulatory control. It's very rare. However, the reality speaks for itself. You have the figures. There's not a procedure undertaken by the Commission every time there is an alert or a warning. There is this idea of assessment. Is this an occasional problem? Maybe we should think about the doses rather than just withdrawing the product. Is it worthwhile, etc., etc.? But I think this is really specific for major crises, and there's training for this. In August 2019, there was a field exercise that took place, and the crisis given as an example was the PA contamination in chamomile tea dedicated for children. So they simulated this crisis linked to PAs. So as an example of in situ practice. And this is what I started to talk about earlier. This is your network here. It's a European network of evaluation, of assessment. Can we really detect emerging risks? Can we forecast them? The CBD, for example, cannabis oil, was this an emergent risk? It was identified one as being so. Let me move on a little more quickly. I'm sorry, I'm nearly finished. And lastly, when governments, when something really bad happens and the media jump on it and, harass the government for a response, then they're going to react by saying, we'll change everything. Classic example, the mad cow crisis led to the creation of EFSA due to this crisis, which was enormous. There was already an organism in place, an authority that functioned quite well, but this gave rise to the creation of EFSA. And, of course, a part of the activities then are going to have to be handed over to the DGAL. That's General Management for Agriculture. That's going to happen next week. And that is an immediate reaction to the crisis which we had to face in 2017 with lactalis. Is that good? Is it not good? I think for Lefsa it was a good thing. For the French decisions, I think that the people concerned in the GCCRF fear that this transfer of relay is perhaps not going to be the simplest answer. The context is already very complicated. And so here we are at the conclusion. There's a whole series of considerations to be taken place, and I'll leave them for you to peruse. Clearly, what can we say? The delay between the warning and actual implementation of any kind of action is usually too long. And we're not talking about major crises. There is this kind of sorting out of warnings. You know, they don't all give rise to action. You have to find the balance between doing something useful and doing nothing at all. So I feel that the curse is fairly well placed at the moment. Separation between management and assessment has advantages and disadvantages, because if we can't be judged in that one agency can't decide if you withdraw a product or not, or withdraw a pesticide, well, are we going to say, well, wait a minute, is the pesticide, is it toxic? Well, of course, because we're taking it off the market. So if you know you're taking it off the market, in the field, we're going to have a little more bias towards toxicity. Can we avoid that? Well, that's why there are two different entities who carry out these two different steps. However, these are, first, obviously, people who work separately. They don't necessarily talk to each other on an everyday basis. So the whole process takes a much longer period of time than would be strictly necessary. With all of these different echelons and levels and delays and time constraints, we have to make sure that the warning, it's only the warnings that really are going to give rise to something that are going to be considered within the regulatory framework. Now, you consider, maybe we should consider trying to steer that differently. With regulation, I don't think we can really lobby, but when it comes to the managers, all of the different offices in Brussels will tell you the importance of the branch, of the agricultural branch, and of the different authorities. I think that the system works. It's there for a reason. It gives rise to regulation. Are we too protective within these regulatory frameworks? Well, everybody has their own opinion on that. However, I believe we need to let the system work and stop changing it every 10 years. Unless there be a pertinent reason. So thank you very much for your attention, and I am available to take any questions should there be any. Thank you very much, Mr. MACIUK. I imagine there will be many questions in the room. Are there many? Yes. Oh, I think we've been talking about contaminants for too long now not to have any questions. Thank you, Alexandre, for this wonderful piece of work that you've carried out. I feel that from what you've been saying that there's something, it's quite random in this kind of triggering warnings or alerts. For example, the mad cow, you couldn't really say that nothing was happening. Even if we did actually take our time, we dragged our feet when we had to actually do something. So why are they looking for the smaller things and instead of looking at the things that are obvious? When you talk about the PAs, I'm still waiting for the figures on liver cancer, which have been triggered by infusions, herbal infusions. It doesn't seem rational to me that we're talking about this. However, once it's launched with the different systems that don't teach each other, health and food are two different worlds, how can we stop it all? We're there, decisions are taken and consequences are taken, quite important decisions are taken with consequences for some branches who don't perhaps have the support of lobbies. So how can we come back to a more reasonable way of behaving? Is it possible even? Or should we wait for Father Christmas to bring us a present every year? Well, the random aspect, I think you're right when you say things that can be quite random. I've been working at the ANSES for some time, or was anyway, in Nutrivigilance. And there's this kind of notion of authority, of incentive, and it's very difficult to put them into some kind of algorithm which would allow it to say, okay, at this level, when we get to such and such a level, that's where we're going to launch a real alert. There's no kind of tool which is monitoring social networks, for example, to see what are the undesirable effects of such and such a product. So it's very delicate, yes. However, there is, when you say random, yes, there is that side. But there's a very subjective side as well to the evaluation or the assessment of an ingredient which is presenting a problem. Now, you could say many people have a minor undesirable effect. Is that a priority over one case of fatal hepatitis? Where do we put the priority? Everybody's going to think that their case is particularly important. Can we prioritize one over the other? What I've been able to see is that, yes, there is the random aspect in the selection of subjects. Can we prevent the machine from moving forward? An example here is when I talked about following the opinion of EFSA on the anthracenics. There were 2 articles, I believe, from the Italian press saying that it wasn't genotoxic. This comes from a researcher, and the conclusion of the articles was that it's not genotoxic. So they reacted to this. They looked at the 2 studies. And they said one didn't really allow us to reach those conclusions, and for the other, yes, it's genotoxic. Consequently, for us, we're not convinced. Is it possible to... Is it possible you have 2 studies with, if they have irrefutable proof that there is some kind of toxic effect, that normally should have concluded in a revision of public opinion, because you have very obvious evidence and there's no presumption. The case would be empirical, and we'd be able to say, okay, we need to change behavior. So it is possible. It's not always the case, unfortunately, because the evidence is not always there from both sides. Once an opinion has been out there, even in terms of assessment, it is very difficult to do an about-turn. You have to have rock-solid proof for the experts to then give an opinion and to trigger a warning. A question in the middle? I wanted to come back on that, on the possibility of a questionnaire or of study with the alkaloids. I would like to see a study launched, but what I really would like to see is not do it myself, to have someone in the EFSA who would say, okay, this is the experiment we're going to carry out regarding alkaloids. They estimated I think we could go from 400 to 4,000 in terms of the different products that we're talking about. Is there one single point of contact for us? Could we work with whom we could work to say to the body, look, we can finance a study, but you're going to pilot it. There's no point in coming to see us with an article saying this product is no longer valid. It's a real discussion I think we have. Well, the first response is it's not EFSA, it would be the Commission. via or whatever, Interpro syndicate who would work on behalf of the profession. I can't remember which office it is exactly, but I know it exists. Secondly, it's never really happened that the EFSA has given an advice on how to carry out a study. And I don't think that will ever happen. That is not their remit, unless the Commission demands that of them. The reason for this is simple. EFSA cannot commit to a study where it tells you what to do, or where they would say, if you do this, we will maintain your results. They can't do that. They want to maintain the freedom to do their own studies and reach their own conclusions, and I think that's for everything. EFSA puts the guidelines in place, which are rather vague, and then everyone tries to work as best they can, and we look at the eventual results. But EFSA will really never help make suggestions on how many people they should be talking to, how many doses they should be testing. It's ideal, but it's not the role of EFSA. The experts are there, but this is not what their remit is. However, the document that sets the new limits is a synthesis document from EFSA. Yes, because this is based on studies that have already been made. No, so they've done no studies. EFSA does not carry out any studies. They look at the data that already exists, but it's because they've done their research. But they have at no moment are they going to carry out any concrete trials. No, not EFSA. I wanted to say two things. As a toxicologist, we are dealing with the science of catastrophes. As soon as we've discovered toxicity, whether the file will be well handled or not, it's going to be difficult to demonstrate that there's no toxicity. It's more difficult to demonstrate that there's no toxicity than to show that there is. And if I may answer the gentleman from earlier, in the medical world, when we have a substance, there's a consortium of opinion when we're dealing with products to try and lodge a file at European Commission level. For us, it's the DG GROW. It's the European Commission which is then going to contact the experts. It's the CCS for us. For foodies, it's EFSA, and they'll have to validate the file as well. But we never actually communicate with the experts directly. They are going to assess stuff on the basis of the dossier that we're going to hand in or the bibliography. They are not going to carry out tests themselves. They're going to ask us to perhaps carry out supplementary tests because what exists isn't sufficient. We can discuss with them the notion of tests which they might want us to do. And on that basis, that it's always up to the industrialists to actually get on with it and to produce the dossier, to produce the file themselves. That's an excellent transition. Then we could ask the opinion of these actors, these players. We're going to do it right away. Thank you very much, Mr. MACIUK, for this wonderful exposé.